Good afternoon, everyone. I know that there's a line of folks outside signing the guest book, but we're going to go ahead and get started, and we'll give you an opportunity. If you haven't had a chance to sign the book afterwards, you can feel free to do so then. I want to thank you all for being here. As you know, we're here to pay tribute to the life and contributions of our colleague, Marshall Leach, who I'm certain would be very pleased to see the turnout for our gathering to say goodbye to him. As the front of your program says today, Marshall was many things to all of us: a teacher, a mentor, an advisor, a colleague, but perhaps most of all, a friend. Joining me today in making some brief remarks are four people who knew Marshall very well: Roger Webb, Dave Hertling, Steve Chaddock, and Tom Brewer. Our remarks will conclude, and then those of you who would like to do so are welcome to come up and to share your personal remembrances of Marshall. Marshall arrived at Georgia Tech in 1968 when he enrolled as a PhD student in our school, then known as the School of Electrical Engineering, after serving for 3 years in the Air Force. After graduation, he joined our faculty in 1972, beginning a long and distinguished tenure in which he became one of our most respected and beloved faculty members. A four-time recipient of our ECE Outstanding Teaching Award, an award that's determined by a majority vote of the ECE senior class. He was chosen for this honor at different points in his career in 1975, 1982, 2002, and most recently in 2007. No other member of our faculty in the school has matched or surpassed that feat. It is also a tremendous testament to his steady consistency through the years, but most of all, it's a testament to his passion for his work and unwavering commitment to our students. Without fail, whenever I meet with EC alumni, everyone always asks about Marshall and shares a story about a class they took with him and his influence. He earned among the highest teaching ratings in the school, and he was a much sought after research project advisor. And it has been estimated that he probably taught somewhere in the teens of thousands of students throughout his career. His popularity as a teacher, his open door policy with students, and his time spent with those students as faculty advisor of IEEE, REC FM, and the Institute Radio Communication Board have left indelible impressions upon the students who have earned EE or CompE degrees at Georgia Tech. Former students still enrolled at Georgia Tech, alumni of various majors, and many others from around the world who never even met Marshall contacted him for technical advice and consulted his web pages for construction plans for amplifiers and loudspeakers that he and his students developed. Several alumni who have emailed or called to express condolences after Marshall's passing noted that they still use their Leach loudspeakers and amps, even 20 to 30 years after they were built. Faculty who spend time with students outside of the classroom are often in turn with the students' concerns and issues, making them all the more genuine and approachable. Marshall, through his untiring efforts both inside and outside of the classroom, has influenced several generations of Georgia Tech electrical engineers and computer engineers, in addition to untold others from around the world. He will be greatly missed. At this time, I'd like to ask for Roger Webb to come up and share a few of his words.
I guess Gary pretty much covered it all, but I'll try to make a few additional remarks. Marshall Leach was a unique and uniquely talented individual. As Gary said, he came to Georgia Tech to do his PhD after having completed a master's at South Carolina. He worked with Demetrius Paris as a student. Demetrius held him in highest regard, thinking of him always as one of his best students. And upon graduation, Demetrius offered Marshall a job, and to the lasting benefit of Georgia Tech and 3 decades of students, Marshall accepted. He could have done most anything he wanted professionally. He was trained in electromagnetics, and he continued to teach electromagnetics throughout his career. But what he's really specialized in was audio engineering, and he was very good at it. Had he been so inclined, he could have created an outstanding funded research effort in audio engineering. I had conversations like that with Marshall over time. He had no passion for any of that. Had he been bitten by the entrepreneurial bug, we would probably have Leach systems out there competing with Bose systems for the high end of the hi-fi market, or perhaps we would only have Leach systems. Over the many years that I worked with Marshall, I never heard him complain. He never made any demands. Those two facts by themselves support my uniqueness conjecture. On occasion, he would ask for modest support of his laboratory. He would do that almost in an apologetic way, and we provided what support we could. But that was his true passion, was working with students in the laboratory. There are scores of students out there, as Gary mentioned, who have Marshall Leach derivative sound systems still in use and proudly displayed. Thousands more who've had the experience of dealing with Marshall in that context. He had a true passion for that function. He received outstanding attribution from students. As Gary said, he received the Outstanding Teacher Award many times. I suspect if there were not an egalitarian component to the selection of such honorees, he would have received it many more times. There was always a line of students waiting to deal with Marshall. Had he an alternate passion for research or entrepreneurship, he probably would have received more prestigious awards and attribution, but none would have meant as much to Marshall as the formal and informal attribution from his students. Marshall left us too soon. His legacy will persist over the time constant of the memory of those of us who were fortunate enough to work with him and those students who were fortunate enough to have him as a mentor. It's entirely appropriate that a lasting memento to Marshall be created. I hope that that will be constructed in such a way as to ensure his legacy for students yet to come. Thank you.
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is I'm really grateful that I've been a friend and colleague of Marshall's for the last 30 plus years. It's just been an honor and a very valuable part of my career. I met Marshall in 1978 when I came to Georgia Tech. And we had a lot of common ground right away. I came from the broadcast industry, a company that built broadcast equipment. And of course, Marshall was involved with rec radio and audio equipment. Plus our overlap with analog electronics made us friends right from the beginning. I even knew about Marshall before I got here. One of the engineers at Harris that I worked with was a Georgia Tech graduate, and he said, "Oh, when you get to Georgia Tech, you've got to look up Marshall Leach. He's one of the best design engineers you'll ever know and a world-class guy." And of course, he was right. Over the years, Marshall and I had quite a few conversations, technical conversations, partly because of the overlap of our interests, but also our proximity of our offices. But there was a big difference. I'd go down to Marshall when I was stuck and had no clue how to proceed, and he'd always help me. He came to me after he'd already figured out the problem and just wanted to make sure it was right or maybe a couple of facts, and he was almost always right. It was just uncanny. And like I said, the proximity of our offices, if you're familiar with the third floor of Van Leer, my office, if you open the door, you can look right down the north corridor and see Marshall's door. And I usually get there early in the morning. Marshall would arrive later and stay late, but anyway, for years I had a bird's eye view. He'd arrive mid-morning, early morning, mid-morning, thermos of coffee, his lunch, his papers he had graded. He'd open his door. He'd sit in he'd turn on his music. You could always hear his music coming down the hallway, which was very pleasant.
and he'd sit in that big chair you can see on your program there. But before you know it, there was a crowd outside of his office, or at least several people. And it was a mixture. It was students seeking help, faculty, our technical staff, technicians. There's always somebody there. He always had time for everybody. It's just not going to seem right looking down that hall anymore. I was there today looking down, and it just doesn't seem right not see his door open. I've called Marshall several times a student's professor, and then let me expand on that a little bit. He's the kind of professor you would have wanted when you were in school, you'd want your son or daughter to have. Okay, first of all, he's very knowledgeable. He's kind of known for audio and acoustics and analog electronics, but it's way beyond that. As Roger pointed out, his PhD thesis was in electromagnetics. For years, I've advised students, I'm big on breadth and depth, and students will come to me and they'll say, you know, you don't really want to be a mile wide and inch deep when you select your courses. And then I said, on the other hand, you don't want to be an inch wide and a mile deep. Marshall was a mile wide and a mile deep. He just seemed to know everything about everything. He's the kind of guy, if you had a new research area and nobody knew anything about it, you hire him and he'd figure it out. So very, very knowledgeable. He was always prepared for his classes. And he wasn't one of these guys that just taught from the text. He would know the fundamentals to applications. He would present the material that way in a concise, very logical order. Okay, and I think students really picked up on that. Years ago, I split a section with 3270 with him in the summer. Tom White used to do that every now and then, where he'd sign 2 faculty members. So in 3270, for those of you who haven't been around a while, it was the third in the electronic sequence. Students found it very challenging. It's multi-stage amplifiers, frequency response, nonlinear feedback. And when I went to Marshall's lecture, and this is a course I'd probably taught 3 or 4 times a year for 10 or more years before this, I learned something every day. He had his own ways of doing things. Again, not just teaching from the text. He had these self-developed techniques that would analyze frequency response or multi-stage amplifiers, and they were really quite clever, and I was taken aback. In fact, I worried a little bit that he made it look so easy that the students might not really understand how hard of a problem they just solved. So that was my only criticism of him. He was also an excellent communicator. To me, what really makes a good professor or instructor is somebody that can separate the concepts from the details. Okay, you can't teach people experience. You can't teach them the details. If you're a good instructor, you can get the concepts across, and with very good selection of homework problems and projects, the student learns and gains experience and fills in the details. Marshall was a master at that. Okay. Now, Marshall was kind of a low-key and quiet-spoken guy. Didn't have a lot to say, but what he said was always right on the mark. He always was patient. He had time for everybody. I don't ever remember seeing him turn anybody away at his door. He expected a lot out of students. I mean, it wasn't like he was trying to be one of the guys and be easy and give good grades. He worked them hard, but I think they really respected him for it. He was kind to everyone. In all the years I knew him, I don't ever remember him saying anything personally derogatory about anybody. Like Roger said, he didn't complain, and just pleasant to be around all the time. Also, he's always looking out for students. I've been involved with the graduate office for about 12 years now, and often Marshall would come by my office and say, you know, this student is a little frustrated, needs help finding an advisor. This student's really good, was the best TA I ever had, has been tutoring student. I mean, he was looking out for students, and I don't think they even knew it. So he would do things like that for students in a very professional and great way. Now, external to Georgia Tech, and Roger hinted on this a little bit, I taught a lot of short courses, and I did quite a bit of traveling and so forth. When anybody would find out I was from Georgia Tech, I would often be asked, do you know Marshall Leach? I mean, that just wasn't unusual at all. Oh, does he still build amplifiers? I said, that amplifier, he designed that in the 70s before people knew how to design solid-state amplifiers, and it was the best amplifier. I mean, you just heard this all the time, all the time. By the same token, a lot of former students will come by. Sometimes they send me emails, sometimes they come by my office. Many times they've said, he's the best professor I ever had, best teacher I ever had. I mean, you just hear this over and over, and as Roger said, he probably would have had more than 4 teaching awards if there wasn't a rule that you can't win it for a couple of years after you win it once. Roger alluded to that. But there's no doubt that he's been a tremendous asset to Georgia Tech. Okay, the reputation of both ECE and Georgia Tech have been better because of Marshall's tenure here. He's left at a better place than when he came. I mean, it's a better place because Marshall was here for 40 years, whatever. And those of us that knew him and had the pleasure of working with him, we're really better off for it, and we were really privileged. Thank you.
Marshall Leach has been called a student's professor, and you should get a student up here to talk about him. Well, I'm one of his students. I took courses under him in the fall quarter of 1970 and the winter and spring quarter of 1971. And so I'll never forget my first day of classes as a Georgia Tech student in September of 1970. I walked in my first Georgia Tech class at 8 a.m. It was communication systems taught by a guy named Ray Pettit. He gave the best lecture I'd ever heard. Then at 9 a.m. I had my first electromagnetics class, and Marshall gave a better lecture. And so it was kind of strange, but I didn't know who Marshall was, and he wasn't listed as the instructor of the course. He was just a graduate student, and graduate students can't teach graduate students, or at least that's the way it used to work. And so the actual instructor of the course was the school director, Dr. Demetrius T. Paris. And when I walked in the room, Dr. Paris was standing at the lectern, and he called the roll. He asked what I still consider to be a bizarre question: where are you from, and what textbook did you use in EM when you went to school? So I told him where I was from. I thought about lying and saying I'd used Paris and Hurd, but instead I was honest and said I'd used Krauss. And he seemed pleased with that. Then he sat down after about 10 minutes. And also in the front room was Dr. Kenneth Hurd, who was the Graduate Affairs Director. And I expected him to jump up next and talk, but instead this tall, thin young man with prematurely gray hair got up and started writing equations on the board. And I whipped out my pencil and started copying them down. So that gives you an idea how much education has changed in 40 years. When I'm in class and I write something on the board that any of my students consider even remotely worth copying down, they whip out their digital cameras and take a picture of the board. And I feel like Lindsay Lohan being pursued by the paparazzi. Well, back then, all we had were pencils and slide rules, and I had to copy as fast as I could. Later on, we were told that Marshall would be the guest lecturer in electromagnetics, which means if Dr. Paris was at a meeting someplace on campus or out of town, Marshall would deliver the lecture. Well, Marshall delivered all the lectures, not only in the fall quarter, in the winter quarter, and in the spring quarter. He also prepared all the homework problems and all the tests, and he graded them. Then at the end of the quarter, he would make recommendations to Dr. Paris as to what grade to give us. And I got to know him by asking him how to work these homework problems. I decided to put this picture up here to show you that at one time Marshall had something other than gray hair. And so when I first saw him, it was a little mixture of gray and black, okay? And so back in the 1980s, the Georgia Tech Student Faculty Committee, the EE Student Faculty Committee, had a student who was on it who had some mild gift as an artist. And they decided to make a t-shirt, and the t-shirt would have various members of the EE faculty on there. And they decided to make this a parody on the Clint Eastwood movie, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And it's called The Good, the Bad, and the Shafts. And so up here in the front row, we have Pete Rodriguez, who's here close to the front row now. Then here we have Marshall Leach. He's holding a loudspeaker upside down and saying, "It's been my experience," which is one of his favorite classroom quotes. Back here in the back row, in the shaft category, you have me. Now, it never bothered me that I was placed in the shaft category, because in order to have outstanding teachers, you have to have people in other categories for contrast. And besides, back then, I was a bad boy. Okay, so one of the things Marshall and I used to talk about is what is the time constant of a person in ECE? Namely, when you leave the scene, how long will it be until there's absolutely no one walking the halls who even knows who you were? And so I hope Marshall will last a little bit longer than certainly I will, but for a number of reasons. First, His ECE 3050 lectures are recorded. And so if you want a first-class lecture, you can dial up his lectures and watch them. Now, if you look at what the cost of textbooks in engineering are these days, around $200, and the Hope Scholarship pays $300, and they're going to drop that, these web-based instructions may become more and more attractive. The second reason I hope his memory will live a little bit longer is the audio engineering lab and audio engineering course and the textbook which he authored. Now, every school in the country that has located on an exit off an interstate has a course in acoustics, which is simply the physics of the propagation of sound. And all these engineering schools have courses on noise abatement. But I think the course here at Georgia Tech, which redesign amplifiers and loudspeakers for use in audio systems, is unique to Georgia Tech. And so that's certainly something that he put a stamp on our curriculum. The third reason I hope that he will be remembered is his webpage, which is both a valuable technical reference to people taking classes currently, people all over the world taking classes. It also has a bunch of do-it-yourself projects in how to construct loudspeakers, amplifiers, etc., and so forth. He also had a bunch of things on his webpage, such as weird science links and so forth. He even had a YouTube video, which one of my students put on the web when I was having a bad day in class. That is to set apart the other days I have in class, but nevertheless. And so his webpage is a valuable resource, and I hope it'll stay there for a considerable length of time. Now, one of the things I was grateful Marshall never put on his webpage is a picture he made of me in 1972. This is me in 1972. Now, you should not draw from this picture the inference that I was some long hair type. I was simply a graduate student working for EE, and considering what they were paying me, I decided a barber was something I couldn't afford. Marshall taught me many things. He taught me everything I know about electronics, computers, and a number of other things. He also taught me how to cut my own hair. He had limited success on that score. Now, I turned the tables on Marshall and started taking pictures of him. This is him at the Eta Kappa Nu picnic in some spring. And he used to go to the picnic all the time because they wanted him to bring the audio system. He got tired of it and stopped going. Then he started winning all these Best Teacher awards and he had to go. I started going with him because I found out that the Eta Kappa Nu picnic was the only place on campus where they served decent food. And so I accompanied him to a number of these picnics. And this is him on his 70th birthday in the audio lab, trying to appear satisfied with the card we got him, which says, "Happy 70th birthday." And so this is a picture of Marshall and our friend John Pamakian taken at Stone Mountain Park. We used to eat Thanksgiving dinner out there every day, every Thanksgiving rather. We ate there every day, only Marshall could afford it. And so we ate there every Thanksgiving. I can't eat there any longer because it reminds me of my two friends. Now, I don't have Marshall with me to compute to the exact penny what to leave as a tip. Now, I could go on about Marshall's impact on the curriculum and so forth, but I'd like to give you a few short stories which tells you something about the Marshall Leach you don't know. Well, back in 1980, he lived in Decatur, and he had this oak tree in his front yard, and it was filled with squirrels doing whatever it is squirrels do. They were making a mess in his yard. He just couldn't stand it, so he bought something called a tinder trap, which is a little steel trap. He would bait it with peanut butter, and these squirrels would crawl in it, and it would slam shut. He would put them in the trunk of his car and drive them here, release them in the EE parking lot. We would open this cage up, and sometimes the squirrels would just bolt out of the cage. Other times they're reluctant to come, and either he or I would kick the cage, and they would take off, and you've never seen a squirrel run that fast. Years later, Marshall and I would take a little constitutional walk around the campus, and he would bring the stale bread with him, and he would break it up and throw it to the squirrels. And I think he felt guilty about having shanghaied their ancestors from peaceful downtown Decatur over here to Georgia Tech, where every time you turn around, somebody's knocking something down or putting something up. And also, Marshall got fed up with Decatur, and he moved to Tucker, where he had a much nicer house. He got home one night, and he found out that a burglar had broken in. And so I asked him, well, what did the burglar take? Well, he said we took some DVDs and $800 in cash. The DVDs belonged to me, so it was no big deal. And so I asked him, why on earth did you leave $800 in cash just sitting on a table? He gave me an explanation, which if you didn't know Marshall would make absolutely no sense. When he lived in Decatur, he would mow his yard, and then he would go across the street and mow the yard of this elderly woman who lived next to him. She was a few cans short of a six-pack. And she told Marshall once that she was afraid that her daughters were trying to steal her money, so she gave him the $800 for safekeeping. He didn't know what to do, so he simply took and set it on a table. The lady died, and he still didn't know what to do, so he simply took the $800 when he moved from Decatur to Tucker, left it sitting on the table. And so when the burglar broke in, he saw my DVDs and probably made some nasty comments about my taste in movies, and then he grabbed the $800 in cash and took off. So when the Gwinnett County Police finally got there, the burglar had broken open a door, and he asked Marshall, do you have any weapons with which you defend yourself? Well, Marshall had absolutely no interest in guns whatsoever, but he did have a shotgun, which his father left him, so he went and got it, and I don't know if it had been loaded for 60 years or he loaded it, and he pointed it up, touched the trigger, it discharged, and blew a hole in his kitchen ceiling. And I told him he should have written a testimonial to the Remington Firearms Company for having built a weapon that's so fine that after 60 years of collecting dust, it fired on the first shot. Well, Marshall and I talked about a lot of things, and one of the things we talked about is he told me that when he retired, under absolutely no circumstances did he want any retirement ceremony. So Marshall, if you can hear me, I'm sorry, I screwed up again. Okay, so Marshall left me with lots of memories. He taught me lots of things. I thank him for lots of things, and the main thing I thank him for is putting up with me for 40 years, which is a tall order. See? Thank you.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Roger and Dave, as well. I did want to mention that I wanted to recognize President and Mrs. Peterson, who joined us for the ceremony. We appreciate I know your busy schedule. We appreciate you being here with us. I don't know if anyone else from the administration made it in, but if I don't see you, I apologize. But thank you all for coming. At this time, we'd like to allow anyone who has a brief remembrance they'd like to share to say a few words about their experience with Marshall. Remember, it's a big crowd, and I'm sure we all had an experience, but we would like to give you an opportunity to say something. I will mention also that if you haven't already seen it, in the lobby of the Van Leer building, there's a display case that has a Leach amplifier and speakers and some biographical information and pictures that you might want to take a look at if you have an opportunity. So at this time, if anyone would like to come up and say a few words. Please.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mike Caldwell. I was a graduate student of Marshall's. In fact, his first graduate student in the electroacoustics program, starting in 1975. I remember Tom being a graduate student at the time, and we would always hang there together in Marshall's lab. If you're fortunate in your life, you'll meet one person, maybe a couple, that make a big difference. And Marshall was one of those for me. You've heard all, and most of you know about all his accomplishments and his great personality. He was an amazing person, and so many things about him that as Tom mentioned, you really don't know unless you've been around him for a while. I do remember one situation that Marshall won an NSF grant to start the audio lab, and he was 74, and I was there at the time, and he got a grant to buy instrumentation for it, which was very fine instrumentation from Brule and Kjær out in Denmark. We were probably one of the few audio labs in the East, maybe one of the 2 or 3 that were going to have this great instrumentation. So it was on order, we were waiting for it. And it finally came in, and that day I wandered down to his office, and there were boxes on the floor, ready to go. And he was digging them open, and we were getting the gear out. And we had that gear up and running in just a couple of hours, and the first thing he did with it was measure a student's project. That gives you an idea of the kind of guy he was. And Won't see many like him again. Another thing I remember and very grateful to Marshall for was his trust in students, specifically in me. It was about, I guess it was about a year after I got out of graduate school. He called me up and said, I've got a problem. I've got to do this research for the Air Force project this summer. And I'm scheduled to teach my course, and I can't do it. Would you teach it for me? And I was kind of floored. I never thought that I would get a chance to teach a college course, much less one that I love so much in audio engineering. So I did, and it was a tremendous experience for me, not wanting to be an educator per se, but all the things that you learn about a course when you actually have to teach it. And everybody who's teaching knows you can never learn it as well as you need to learn it when you got to teach it to somebody else. So that was a great experience, and it changed a lot of things about my life that I was able to do that. And Simon Gunn, a year later, he called me back and said, I got to do it again. Would you teach it again for me? So I had the pleasure of doing it twice for him. And it was, again, it was a great experience. And we talked about it and through the years, and I remember telling him what a difference it made for me. We won't see one like him again. And if you, those of us who had the experience of being with him and learning from him, treasure it. It's a gift.
Anyone else? Any students, maybe?
I'm Ryan James. I had the privilege of taking analog and audio from Professor Leach. And probably the thing I'll remember him most for, though, was just, as everyone's already said, his openness to accept students into his office. I would go into his office most of the days of my senior year and just read through his antique audio books, and he'd put up with me just sitting there and asking him questions all day. But I remember he would tell stories all the time about his hometown in South Carolina. And I guess he told me a story once, probably related to his graduate teaching, but he said something that was just mentioned. He said, I learned the material so well because I actually taught it. And I guess he was helping a student at one time, and the student said, you're pretty good at this, you should be a teacher. And I think he said something like, that sounded like a pretty good idea, so I went with that. So was an amazing teacher, as you guys probably all know, and I was anticipating analog and audio long before I ever got to the third and fourth years. So those were kind of legendary, I think, for a lot of people when they're coming in. More than anything, and I'll definitely remember him just as a good friend.
Is there anyone else?
I almost let this opportunity pass, and there was just one aspect of Marshall's personality that I didn't think was covered, and that was his sense of humor. He was a quiet guy, but he had a great sense of humor. I was a student. I took 3 courses from him as an undergraduate. Was influenced by him. I tried and patterned my teaching style after what he did with his open door policies and all that kind of stuff. But I'll never forget sitting in his office one day, as we all as students did, and we were just talking. You learn more there just talking to him than you ever learn in class, and that says a lot because he was such a great teacher. But we were sitting there, and all of a sudden I heard a scream from the room next to him where his lab was. And he just started laughing. And what he had was, he had a policy where you could use his lab for any project, personal, whatever you wanted, use his equipment, come in at all hours of the day. His hours were really long. And he actually had student hours, where we were around when he was around. And what had happened was, he had one policy, and that was don't mess with his parts. And he had these drawers of parts that were underneath the benches. And what he would do is he would charge up these capacitors. And when people would go in and start stealing his parts, they would run up to the electrodes and they would fire, and that's what you heard. It was I think he got such a big, he didn't ever go in there, he knew what was going on, he didn't get off his chair, nothing. He knew what had happened. And, you know, just that aspect of it, I don't think I ever saw him personally break out into a hilarity laughter. He was reserved in his laughter, just like he was reserved in his personality. But he would give a good few chuckles that are just memorable, and I thought that aspect of his personality needed to at least be mentioned and remembered.
I guess as an administrator now, I'm glad I didn't know about the booby-trapped. I'm obliged to do something about it now. Thank you all for coming. This was a great event. Please feel free to stay. If you didn't get a chance to sign the guest book, do that. We'll leave the slides up for a while and you can just look at the pictures. And everyone have a happy holiday season, and we'll see you back next semester.